Go, guys, go. It's a little bit here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We have two topics today. The first one is on the new drop reasons added from Prasun. Prasun, do you want to go ahead and present your screen? You're on mute.
Sure, yeah, okay. Let me share my screen.
Sorry, I'm just still not hearing you. Maybe it's my headset.
Okay, are you able to hear
Is
me
anyone
now?
else able to hear Prasun?
Yeah, we can hear it.
Okay. Tejaswini, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Let me check with Tejaswini. So while Tejaswini is fixing her audio problems, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, yes, we can see. You can proceed.
Okay. Okay, so I think she is saying that we can continue with the topics. So, let me discuss my change. So I have a change in two files, site debug counter.h and site port.h. A little bit of background here. So we are observing various types of in discards, and we want to know what the exact reason is. So we want to go deeper to find out what is the exact cause of packet drops in the ingress pipeline. So in that process, we are looking into what are the various drop reasons that are already defined by SCI, and what are other things that our vendors may be capable of or are capable of exporting. So with that thought process in mind, I started looking at some of the failures that we observe and some of the features that are there in our current vendors, and came up with this set of changes. So here I have three in-drop reasons that I'm introducing. So the first one is the reason is SMAX 0. The second is DMAX 0. The third one is LPM miss. So SMAX 0 and DMAX 0, these two things, they don't, I mean, we have some types of L2 drop errors that we catch, but these two things don't exist. And that's why I added them. And I know some vendors are capable of exporting SMAX 0, some are capable of exporting DMAX 0, but we have seen issues related to these in our production in the past, so that those would be good to have. The third one is the LPM miss, SCI in drop reason LPM miss. So this one, the LPM miss, there is LPM 4 miss and there is LPM 6 miss that already exists today. So SCI in drop reason, LPM 4 miss and 6 miss. So these are basically if the vendor is capable of separating out V4 and V6. Now we have seen some vendors who do not have hardware counters to keep track of V4 and V6 misses separately. So rather than confusing the vendor or us, I thought that why not define something that is agnostic to V4 or V6 so that the contract is clear between the vendor and us. So that, with that spirit in mind, I decided to introduce the LPMS counter. So those are the three changes in the site debug counter.h. And then I had a simpler change in site port.h, which is adding 8 more configured drop reason counters. So these are the basically the counters that are used to map to the drop reasons. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. So we have one of these configured drop counters can be mapped to one or multiple in drop reasons. So we had 8 of them, and I thought that as we are going deeper to expose more of these in drop reasons, we'll need more. So I introduced 8 more configured drop reason counters. So those are the changes in these 2 files that I've made. Received a small query from Broadcom on it, responded to it. That is, yeah, so Jay from Broadcom has this question: is it intentional to only track the LPM miss and not the host route miss? My response has been, this is intended to be similar to the LPM4 miss and LPM6 miss counters. The only thing that's different is that it is agnostic to V4 and V6. So this is the status of this pull request. So let me pause for a second to see if there are any questions. Okay, so just to recap, we are introducing 3 in-drop reasons and adding 8 more counters, 8 more configured drop reason counters. So I'm not too familiar with the process of the approval. This is my first meeting that I'm attending. Would like to know what is expected as a next step. Do we need to have multiple people approve this to move forward?
Yeah, I think we'll have at least 2 other vendors sign off on this, and yeah, and I think Kamil will look at it. Probably has already reviewed it from a backward compatibility standpoint as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Looks like Kamil's already approved it, so we require 2 other vendors to sign off on this, and then we can merge.
I see.
Okay.
So yeah.
Anybody has any feedback or questions on it? Otherwise, if you could please help review the PR offline, that would be helpful. Yeah. Thanks, Prasan. I think if
Thank you.
okay. Yeah, I think we can probably move on to our next topic. James?
Yes, thank you. I'll just find my screen share. There we go. So I'm also new to this group, so thanks for having me. This is the pull request that I've opened here. the gist of this pull request is adding a couple of new read-only attributes to the switch API to allow the user to get the object IDs for some default buffer pool objects. And there's a couple of reasons why you might want this that we can go into in a bit more detail. But at a high level, the idea is that a switch may start up and have some default internal objects to allow some basic packet handling behavior without user configuration, or it may have some internal special objects for the CPU port. In the case that the user wants to configure these, they need to be able to get an object ID to represent them. They can then configure and reference those objects in other site objects. So in order to do that, this change advocates for adding 2 new attributes. So I'll skip onto the actual attributes here. 2 new attributes for the default CPU ingress buffer pool and default CPU egress buffer pool. So that is the change at a high level. I'm just going to leave the API description on the screen for a minute or so, and then we can talk about this in a little bit more detail. But at this point, does anyone have any questions? All right, no questions right now. Okay, so let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. So the purpose and motivation, I think I've covered already. The switch might have some internal default buffer pools for CPU ports, or it might special case them because they may have different capabilities or different, might not be as configurable as other buffer pools, for example. So SI may manage them internally, but wish to expose them to the user to accept some configuration for those buffer pools. So the change aims to cover both of those things, being able to query these default object IDs and SI essentially owning them internally and special casing them. And the way that we're exposing this is, the attributes on the switch API, which follows the same pattern as a bunch of other default objects, like the default router, virtual router ID. This change is quite flexible. So it doesn't, if a vendor chooses to implement this, we're not, this doesn't inherently apply any restrictions on what those default buffer pool attributes are. The vendor could return a null object ID for these to indicate that either there is no internally managed buffer pool or they don't support this API, in which case the user would still be able to use the conventional create and remove operations to create and remove buffer pools for use with the CPU port. You don't have to support.
Quick question, sorry. Yes, this is Ashutosh.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what is the sort of the end use for this? I mean, once you get this information and you know which buffer pool is there used by the SI adapter, in the NOS, how do we use this information or plan to use it?
Yeah, so I've got an example of that here. So in this usage example, it's much simplified, but the user queries the egress buffer pool ID. They can then configure that, maybe to change the buffer pool size. They can assign that to a buffer profile, and then assign that buffer profile to a queue associated with the CPU port. And CPU port there. And that essentially allows the user to configure, to apply buffer configuration to the CPU port queues without SI necessarily needing to support like the full creation flow for a buffer pool.
So you basically have some side implementation which does allow you to change all this, but not necessarily create it from the start. So you're saying that the buffer
Yeah.
pool creation is not required, but updating all these parameters is something that Sai will have to support for it to be usable.
Yes, in a sense. I think the distinction between CPU port buffer pools and other types of ports is it seems like a valid distinction. Like the CPU port would have sort of very different characteristics to other ports. Potentially, it's different requirements. So I think it seems reasonable to have sort of special buffer pool requirements or behavior for that.
Yeah, I agree with it. I'm just sort of thinking out loud that it's possible
Sure.
that even though the buffer profile pool exists for the in the Psi adapter and it returns your object ID, given that some or most Psi adapters use CPU buffer pool is kind of distinct, they may not allow you to configure all these parameters on it. In the sense
Yeah,
that they have
exactly.
some level of flexibility in configuring the buffer pool as they have any other buffer pool. So in that case, do you need some kind of capability query or something to figure out if that buffer pool does allow you to change all these parameters? Or
I don't think you'd necessarily. Oh, so are you suggesting a capability on the buffer pool itself rather than a capability to indicate whether these attributes would be supported?
yeah, just because there is a buffer pool there and they return let's say an object ID, but a Psi adapter may still not allow you to configure those attributes because as you're aware, there's like as you said, right, these are special buffer pools created typically.
Yeah.
At any time, and sometimes the Psi adapter may not allow you to change it. The characteristics of the buffer pool. It may give you object ID, but it may still not allow you to change the characteristics of the buffer pool. I'm just thinking,
Right.
I have not looked into any particular.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll admit that I'm not that familiar with capability indications on Psi. This is a new area for me. So how would this typically work for?
It is actually, okay, just a moment, James. Okay, so it is actually about capability for specific object, right? So it's still Psi object, okay, pool, existing pool. Some can be created by NOS and some can be created by Psi internally, right? And
Yep.
so I don't know, okay, if you have capability, okay, to ask about some capability for specific type of object. I mean, all are pool object, but okay, some pool can be a bit different, right?
Yep.
Okay, so the
Yeah,
question...
that points us in an interesting direction. So I think one of the obvious questions is, could we not use the existing APIs to get this pool ID? So one area that I looked at was whether you can use the get object key API to basically iterate through any existing buffer pools. Would that allow you to identify the ingress and egress buffer pool for the CPU ports? And the answer is no, because there's no attribute on the buffer pool to indicate that something is specifically for the CPU port or not. And I think without that attribute presence on the buffer pool object itself, you would also you're running into the same issue as we have with the capabilities. There's no way on the API to distinguish between a buffer pool for use with the CPU port and other buffer pools. So I think in the case where a user gets this buffer pool ID and tries to set some attribute on it that isn't supported by Psi because it's a special buffer pool, I think the only solution would be to just return an error status rather than being able to indicate that ahead of time through capabilities. All right, I think I got through all of these bullet points. Oh yeah, I didn't mention this last one. So if the vendor supports it, it would be okay for the user to query this object and then potentially delete it and replace it with a custom pool. Again, that comes down to implementation specific support, but the API doesn't prevent this. That is, I think with the current API, that would be the only way to modify the threshold mode of that buffer pool, as that is a create only attribute. Okay, so that's the end of the content that I had prepared. Does anyone have any more questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Did anybody want to bring up any topic? Okay, if not, we'll give everyone some time back. Thanks all for joining.